Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Brown Bag. Want to take this time to introduce and thank Dr. Josh Duncan and Dr. Justin Peacock, who will be presenting with me. I'm Dina Kurzweil, and I'm the Director of the Education and Technology Innovation Support Office and an Associate Professor of Medicine here at USU. So here are today's goals for today's session. Please take a moment to review them. So we're going to be talking about prompt engineering, and we hope you'll be able to define it and explain its role in generating specific outputs from generative AI models. We're going to explore some ethical considerations. We're going to discuss the anatomy and identify uses in healthcare education. So I want to kick us off today by talking about some ethical concerns for generative AI, or GAI as it's known. One of the things you need to consider when you make or are considering using generative AI, things like Gemini, which used to be called Bard, or ChatGPT, is that AI presents three major areas of ethical concerns: privacy, surveillance, and bias and discrimination. Remember that ChatGPT and all of these other GAI tools were trained on the entirety of the internet. Nobody gave permission to use the information on the internet to train these tools. Thus, millions of articles, lots of information were used to train these tools to do what they can do. And that has caused some problems. In fact, the New York Times back in December of 2023 was actually suing OpenAI and Microsoft. And these legal challenges could actually cause some emerging legal concerns and ideas. So going out and looking at text and images and other content that GAI can do does require us to think about what we're inputting and how we're inputting it. This idea of content use also has implications in terms of these systems. We have to remember that there is little insight into how data is being collected, processed, and stored, which raises concerns about who can access your data that you input in and how they can use it. These systems are using information you place in them to learn and grow. So it's kind of a twofold approach here. There are other privacy concerns surrounding the use of GAI, which is surveillance. How is it using information and sharing it with others? And also bias. Although generative AI doesn't inherently come with bias, the systems are trained using data from human sources. And the deep learning that occurs can propagate biases throughout its use and its dissemination of information. So it's really important when you're thinking about using GAI to think about these things. Think about what you're inputting. Think about, does it have any data privacy concerns, any PII information, any intellectual ideas that you don't want shared with everybody. And so you need to think about that before you start using any of these tools. Another thing you need to consider before you even delve into generative AI and the tools that support it is that there are now requirements for citation when you're using these tools. APA policy states that authors are responsible for the accuracy of any information in the article. And this means that you as an author must verify any information in citations provided by an AI tool. Authors may use these tools, but APA says they must disclose what they use the specific AI tool for, even if it's just editing. So we don't want to just blindly use sources that are cited in AI tools without reading those sources yourself. And there are two different reasons for this. Generative AI can create fake citations. It can create made up information, what is called hallucinations. And these tools may cite real pieces of writing, but the cited content may be inaccurate. So you need to really take a moment to look at what you're getting out of these tools and ensure that the information is accurate. You can't just take it on face value. You also want to be flexible in your approach to citing AI generative content because emerging guidelines will always be behind the current state of technology and the way that technology is applied. So if you're unsure on how to cite something, include a note in your text that describes how you use a certain tool. But when in doubt, remember that we cite resources for two primary reasons. First, to give credit to the author or the creator of that content that we're using. And second, to help others locate sources you used in your search. Use these two concepts to make decisions about using and citing AI generative content. So here's just a little example of a way that you could actually cite AI content in text citation, in references, and in an appendix. But what I want to highlight here is that you need to verify. Because as I said earlier, generative AI gives you an answer, but it doesn't mean it's accurate. It doesn't mean that even if you're an expert, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't check it. And you need to be on top of this in order to ensure that the information you're using and providing is accurate. Now that we've gone through all this, let's get into prompt engineering, which is why you're really all here, right? And I'm going to turn it over to Josh to talk about our prompt engineering section of this presentation.
Thank you, Dana. And thank you all for joining today. So this is going to be an interactive session in that I invite you to follow along as we enter some of these prompts in a couple of generative AI tools. But first, let's talk about what prompt engineering is. You have probably heard this phrase, and quite simply, it is just asking good questions or providing clear instructions. Because these large language models are trained on effectively the entire internet, you can speak to them or you can type prompts conversationally. However, it's going to follow the instructions that you provide. So I think of this, I enjoyed Amelia Bedelia books when I was younger, and I think of this as being a lot like Amelia Bedelia. So follows the instructions exactly as I provide them. So if I don't provide clear instructions, I may not get the outputs that I intended to get from generative AI tools. We'll talk about a couple of strategies for prompt engineering, but ultimately you can design a prompt and then you will want to refine that to get the output that you're actually looking for. So that can be a bit of an art, and we'll iterate through a series of prompts momentarily. It's also important to know, since these are neural networks, much like if you're giving a presentation, it's going to differ a little bit each time that you give it if you're not reading from a script. And such is the case for generative AI tools. You can type the same prompt and you'll get an entirely different result the next time that you enter that prompt, even using the same tool, and you'll get different responses or different outputs when you're using a different generative AI tool as well. And we'll do a couple of examples of those. So crafting a prompt, I think of a simple strategy here. You want to have a goal. What are you trying to do? You want to provide some relevant context. Think of this as if you're talking to a coworker and you're assigning them a task, or you have an idiot savant intern has been described as using generative AI tools. They'll follow your instructions, but you have to provide that relevant context. You may need to set parameters or set some bounds on the output that you get. And then it may take a few feedback loops. So you may want to iterate and refine the prompt. Here on the right, you see one strategy for crafting prompts. There's only one required element of the prompt, which is the actual task, the question that you're asking or the task that you're assigning to a generative AI tool. These others can help refine your prompt and get you results that may more closely resemble the output that you're intending to get. Those are a role, so you can assign this a role or let the generative AI tool know what your role is, so it can provide more relevant output. You can provide additional context around the task. Providing specific examples can be helpful. You can also specify the format. For example, if you wanted this in a bulleted list or in a table, or if you wanted to generate an image, some of these tools, you can specify that format. And you can also change the tone if you want it to be a very professional tone or more of a jovial or enthusiastic tone. That will change the output that you get from generative AI tools. So let's look at an example. This is one I use generative AI for almost everything now, to include helping me purchase gifts, because that is something that I need some assistance with. So in this example, I'm going to think of I would like to get help choosing a gift for my son. As some background, he's in high school and he loved chess, and we've been playing some board games recently. So as I'm crafting a prompt, these might be some of the things that I'm thinking about that I would want to include. So assigning a role, if I'm buying a gift for my son, knowing some of his interests, I could say act as a strategy game enthusiast. So he likes chess. He's been playing some board games with me more frequently, so that might be an appropriate role for this task. The task is suggest a gift for my son. Can provide a little bit more context. So, some context about my son or about the gifts that he might like. So, I could add a sentence. He is in high school and he plays chess. I could provide some examples of gifts that he might like, or examples of what I'm looking for with this task. So, let's say he likes new chess sets and board games. And I can specify the format of that output that I would like to get back from the generative AI tool. So I could say, present the ideas in a bulleted format or a table if I wanted. And then I can also specify the tone. So again, the only required element of a prompt is the task. It's the question that you are asking or the task that you are assigning. And when you add these additional elements in, you can get more refined outputs. So let's do an example with this series of prompts just to see what that would look like. And this is where I invite you to follow along if you would like to. So we're going to go to gemini.google.com. This is the approved AI tool for us at USU. And there may be others. Just make sure that if you are using AI tools, that they are approved for use at your respective institutions. All right, so we had talked about having just a task. That's the only required element. So I'm going to type that in here, suggest a gift for my son. And then let's see what that provides us. Okay. For a tech-savvy son, give some ideas. I didn't provide it any context, so it's just doing some gifts that sons might like and that it thinks having scraped the entire internet. Okay, now let's provide a role to Gemini here. So I'm going to say, act as a strategy game enthusiast, and now suggest a gift for my son. All right. Now it's asking some clarifying questions. That's a nice thing. Sometimes it will give you output and actually give some recommendations, but it's asking for more context here, and maybe we can provide some additional context in our subsequent prompts. But here we get a couple of strategy tools that are recommended, and some additional ideas too. Okay, all right, that's more in line with what I had intended. Now let's provide it even more context with giving a reference to his age, being a high school student, and that he likes playing chess too. We have a role, we have a task, and now we have some additional context. And let's see how that might refine the output that we get. All right, so now it is looking at this. It's generating the output with that additional context. So now it's recommending chess sets, chess books, subscription, some chess game clocks, other strategy games that might be similar that you might enjoy. This is actually very much in line with the kind of output that I was envisioning. And I could give an example. It looks like it's already added some of these, but I had the example if he likes new chess sets and board games. This might narrow some of the output down. Let's see what that looks like with the example. Now it's very focused on chess sets and different set of strategy games and subscription boxes. Okay. So it's actually giving this to me mostly as bullets now too, but we can specify that format. If I wanted this as a table or in a more bulleted list, let's just see what that would look like. So present the ideas in a bulleted format. Okay, so now this is very much a bulleted format. I could also, if I wanted to have like a pros and cons, print that as a table, that might be a different format that I could ask it to output. So this is more concise in its bulleted format. Now I can change the tone too. So let's add what we had done in our example of using an enthusiastic tone. All right, now this is very enticing. Gear up for epic battles with these gift ideas for your chess-loving son. So it changes the tone, still keeps all of the same context that we had provided previously, but really rewrites everything in accordance with that additional context and the additional tone that we had instructed it to provide. Now, we had mentioned that because these are probabilistic models, just like we may come up with a different list every time we're talking to somebody, it's going to do the same thing. So I'm going to start a new conversation, and we'll type that exact same prompt into Gemini here. And we see that we still get a bulleted list. Maybe this is a little less enthusiastic, but it's a different output than we had before. So we know that each time that you use generative AI, you're going to get something that is a little bit different. That's why it is important to cite that conversation. And the most popular generative AI tools let you do that easily. If I wanted to copy that URL or share this conversation with somebody else so they could see what I typed and what the output from the AI tool was, you can hit that share and export, and you can copy that link. You can export it to Docs or as a draft in Gmail, or you can copy the conversation entirely if you need to do that as well. But when you create those shared links, that will let you share that with other people, and that is how you should cite that if you're following APA or other recommended formats. Now, this is Gemini. Another popular AI tool is ChatGPT, and I'll show you what this looks like in GPT-4. So we'll type that exact same prompt, recommending a game for my son. And all right, so it's got that enthusiastic tone and has some specific recommendations that take into consideration that context that we had provided. So similar outputs. And here in ChatGPT, you can do the same thing. If you want to copy this conversation, you can copy it that way. You can also share the conversation that you had using that URL up at the top. So this is an example of how you might be using generative AI for tasks in everyday life. We can talk specifically next about how this might be used with medical education. So I'm going to transition over to Dr. Peacock.
Okay, so we're going to talk about how we can use it in medical education. And what you've seen is that there's a real power that's associated with generative AI in terms of generating new content But it really depends on what you do in terms of the prompts, as was seen in Josh's section of the presentation. And the same would apply for medical education. And what I tell people when they're using it for medical education is really there are so many different possibilities where you could use generative AI in your everyday life. And I want people to think when they're looking at generative AI, what are the things that are the most challenging, the most taxing, the most suckers of your time? And I want you to think about ways that generative AI could potentially help you avoid mental blocks, writer's blocks, the fear of white space, whatever you want to call it, of getting some of those things done and accomplished in a more rapid and effective manner. And when we were thinking about medical education applications, and a lot of these are also highlighted in a publication, which will be shown in the chat. But you can think of three broad areas, and there's probably more, but these are three things that we thought about. So administrative applications, educational applications, and research applications. So in terms of administrative applications, I've used generative AI often in a lot of different ways as an administrator within my department. You can develop administrative solutions. So a simple example of this is a colleague of mine was a faculty member out in San Diego, and she noticed that a lot of the trainees that she was working with during lectures were using their phones. And so she asked generative AI, what are some ways that I can politely but also firmly insist that individuals do not use their phone during lectures? And it generated an entire prompt of an entire output of what she could say in an email fashion that would be both polite but also firm in the resolution of not using their phones. So it could be something as menial as that. It could also be something like, let's say in your department, I work in nuclear medicine. Let's say a patient comes and has a really bad time with our front desk, finds them to be rude, finds them to be inappropriate, and is really upset and has complained to you as the administrator. Well, what you can do is you can use generative AI to create an appropriate response if that patient emailed you. But also, what I think is important is you could potentially develop a training scenario for quality improvement within your department of how do we handle difficult situations, whether it be a difficult patient or a difficult situation that leads to patient distress or frustration. You can also use it to develop proposals, policies, and white papers. We all love writing these, right? But generative AI can really help you, especially I think a lot of us get writer's block with these on what to say. We have all the ideas kind of in our head and they're maybe in jumbled. But what you can do is you can provide a really nice written prompt that will take all of the things that are in your head and put it into the generative AI and then have it draft a very nice professional looking policy statement or white paper or proposal that you can then tweak and iteratively refine to the point where then you can submit it for whatever you're intending it for. Another nice thing is it can summarize documents. So you can, especially with ChatGPT-4, you can put in PDFs of documents, and it will go through that document and actually outline it for you, summarize it for you. My daughter uses it. This is in the education realm, but uses it to actually generate study guides from the content that is in her classes. In terms of educational applications, you can think of really a large number of potential educational things. We can apply educational theory, and I'm going to show you an example of how we do that here in a second, along with a curriculum design that it can help you with. And I'll show you both of those used in a similar prompt in the next segment here. We all love writing course syllabi, right? They're so much fun to write, so interesting to write. I know we don't like writing them, but what we can do is we can have generative AI help us to generate course syllabi. And it actually does a really good job of this. It actually hits many of the points that would be required in a syllabus. And then you go through and you tweak it based on your individual needs or your individual institutional policies. Generative AI is actually really excellent at scenario development. I've already mentioned one of a difficult patient scenario, but you can think of any quality improvement, patient safety type of scenario, any scenario for testing or assessing students. It does an extremely good job if you provide the right prompt. So we're giving it context, we're giving it what is the critical point that we want to do, what are the things that we are going to be assessing. If you put that all in there, it does an extremely good job of generating scenarios for you that you can then use in in your educational practice. Another thing that it does a very good job at is creating knowledge checks or assessments, particularly if you provide it with the content. So again, I use this with students, and my daughter uses it in her coursework. You put in the content from the PowerPoints or lectures or the lessons. Obviously, you need to look at the privacy issues. So ensuring that you're having students check with their teachers to make sure they're okay with this. But once you've put that in there, it can actually generate a study plan for you, a personalized learning plan, a study guide. It can also generate sample questions. So my daughter actually uses it to generate sample questions to test her knowledge on the material that was within those lectures. And it does an extremely good job of that. And then one thing that is important to note, as we talked about, generative AI can sometimes have hallucinations, and it depends on the content and the material and how effective your prompt was. And so an interesting part of this is also for students that are going through it to go back through the study guide or through the questions and verify that it's correct. And that adds another layer of learning because they're going back through and critiquing and making sure that it's all correct. For the most part, my daughter hasn't had much issue with that, and it depends on the topic. Again, I haven't had much issue when I've used this, but adding that verification piece adds another learning piece for the student as they create this knowledge check, this knowledge assessment, or these personalized learning plans. Then when we talk about research applications, there are a multitude of research applications, and these are just a few of the ones that we looked at. So enhancing research development. So maybe you have an idea or you have a topical area or something that you would really like to do. Well, generative AI can help you develop your specific aims, your goals and objectives for the research project. It can also help you take in literature that you supply to the generative AI and then generate summaries of that literature. And then you can use that within your grant writing, within your project proposals, and your research development. It can also evaluate written work. And now one caution on this is whatever you put into something that's very open to the public, such as ChatGPT, it will be open to the wide internet, right? So certainly if it's work that is sensitive in nature or you don't want revealed to the public, you wouldn't want to put it there. Now, here at USU, if you are a USU affiliated, there is Gemini that is institutionally controlled. And so all of the material that's put into the USU Gemini system will be contained within that environment. So it is not going out to the broader global internet network. So that's a way of kind of limiting who would have access to it. But all of that to say that it does a very good job. I think some people are concerned and some people do try to use it to actually write their papers. I don't encourage that, and I don't encourage my students to do that. But I do encourage them, and I use it myself, to look over sections that I have already written. So if I've written a background or a methods or a results section, I actually have it look through what I've written to see if it makes sense, to see if it's logical, to see if there's flaws or holes in what I have written. And it actually does a very good job of pointing those out and suggesting things that I might want to add to my written work. And then last, I put on here finding references. And this is something that historically generative AI has done a very bad job at. It has been in an area that is rich with hallucinations. So finding references on certain topics, particularly unique or very niche topics, it has a very difficult time finding references within its database because it wasn't trained on those unique set of references. Now, things that are very common or things that are very popular within the literature landscape, such as anything on COVID, I've found it does a very good job of actually finding references that are real and that are in the literature. Now, one caveat I'll say to this all is that it is getting better and better at this. So the current versions of Gemini, as well as ChatGPT-4, now do have internet links, and so it does a better job of actually linking to the internet and finding those references. And then there are add-ons that you can add to ChatGPT and other forms of generative AI that will actually go almost like a PubMed type of search and actually find references for you. And those are much better than the earlier versions of ChatGPT or Google Bard. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gears and we're going to go to a example of how we did this for a curriculum development project. So this is an example of how we used ChatGPT to create a dosimetry curriculum for nuclear medicine. So just like Josh said, if I start out with very generic terms, it doesn't do what I want it to do, right? So if I just say, I would like to develop a new medical curriculum, then ChatGPT goes in and it actually does a good job of outlining things that I should be thinking about. So let's say I've never designed a curriculum before, and I just use that prompt. Maybe that's a good prompt, actually, because now it's going to go through and highlight things that I should be thinking about in developing a curriculum. And what you'll notice as we go through what the ChatGPT is providing us, a lot of this is centered on developing a medical school curriculum. So if you're in charge of an entire medical school, these would be things that you might want to be thinking about. And so you can see different aspects of a medical curriculum, similar to what we would have here at USU. Now, this isn't what I wanted. And so, just like Josh said, we want to refine it more. And so I'm going to provide it with a little more context, but again, not the full amount of what I want. And so you can see what happens. So I said, okay, thank you. I'd like to design a curriculum for nuclear medicine residents and fellows. And so then it goes through and it talks about things that would be important if I was a nuclear medicine fellowship program director, things that I would want to include in my curriculum. And it actually does a very good job of outlining things that would be important to teach nuclear medicine residents and fellows. And it does a nice job of kind of bulleting that and telling me even about like assessment strategies, faculty and resources, development and ethics, and so forth. Now, of course, I wasn't very clear in any of those prompts, and so it didn't really provide me exactly what I wanted. It provided more kind of general things. Now I'm going to be much more clear, and so you can see that I'm providing it a lot more context. I'm giving it parameters. I'm giving it boundaries that I want for this curriculum. So now I'm saying I want a course on radiopharmaceutical dosimetry. The course is going to run 6 weeks. I want it to include these things: basic principles of dosimetry, core aspects of radiation biology, aspects of nuclear medicine equipment, and then practical clinical techniques and research demonstrating patient outcomes using dosimetry. And then I give it the context of these are the people that are going to be taking this course. They're nuclear medicine residents and nuclear medicine fellows, and they have completed medical school, internship, and possibly a residency. So now you can see it's giving me a much better tailored curriculum for a 6-week course, and it breaks it down nicely by 6 weeks. So it says week 1, introduction to radiopharmaceutical dosimetry, basic principles, introduction to radiopharmaceuticals. Week 2, radiation biology, the effects on the cells and on the systematic level. Week 3, the equipment and the dosimetry. Week 4, the clinical techniques and protocols. Week 5, the research and current trends, and then week 6, practical applications and future directions. And these are actually extremely, looking through them as a nuclear medicine expert, these are things that I would want in a dosimetry curriculum. Now, certainly I can tailor that to what I can do or what we can reasonably do within my department, but it does a very good job of giving you kind of that first step, those first prompts, those first thoughts about how to develop that curriculum. And then let's say that I want to propose a new curriculum. Well, to propose a new curriculum and to get it published and things, I really want to frame it in the framework of a curriculum design model in order to get it published, to get it presented, and to have it be effectively used in a wider public. So then, if I don't know about any models, I can actually ask it about theory or ask it about models that I could use to help develop my curriculum. And so then I ask it, what are some of the design models that I could use to design this curriculum? And then it lists out actually several very good, well reputable models, and it actually does a better job of this than when I did it earlier. But you can see that it gives me nice models. And there's one here, the current 6-step that I know about and I'm familiar with. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to follow that 6-step model and apply it to the curriculum that we had already discussed. And so now you can see it goes step by step through the 6 steps and tells me what are the things in each step that we would need to do to develop this curriculum for nuclear medicine dosimetry. So you can see it does an extremely good job of following those instructions and applying those things that I want it to do, but it really requires careful prompting and giving it the right context and the right framework so that it can generate the output that you're desiring. So just to recap kind of what we've talked about today, the key thing that I teach all students and anybody learning about AI is to verify, verify, verify. You have to verify what it comes out. You have to verify what you're actually putting in it. And then if you aren't the expert in that area, I encourage people to go to experts and say, what do you think of this? This was generated by AI. I think it looks pretty good. What are your thoughts on this? Is it true? Is it valid? Recapping Josh's points on prompt engineering, really, if we want to get good output from the generative AI, we need to provide good content to it. So that means including roles, including the task itself, the context, an example of what you're looking for, the format of what you're looking for, and a tone that you might be looking for. And then I talked about different ways that we can use generative AI in medical education. These could be administrative, educational, or research applications. And I want to close this kind of aspect of the presentation with this image. This image was generated by DALL-E, which is a generative image creating tool through OpenAI. And what I asked it to do was create the world is your oyster. So that notion, that idea. And I love this picture that it generated because it's just beautiful, but then also it really describes what I hope to get across to everyone that I talk about AI, is that it's really up to you and your creativity to design what you want with generative AI to do the things that you need to do as a medical education professional or a healthcare professional. So really, based on your creativity, based on your inputs and the right prompts, you can really do almost anything with generative AI. And I think that's the beauty of generative AI.
I want you to take a moment and think about what you will now add into your teaching or research to support and promote the use of generative AI.
Thank you for watching today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag session. You can view all Teaching with Technology Brown Bags on the USU YouTube channel under the full ETI playlist. Have a nice day.